Welcome to Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly spotlight on the people making news and leading change in Indian country.
Welcome to another episode of Native Bidaské. I'm Levi Rickert, your host, and I have with me today two special guests who are going to talk about nutrition and eating good diets and their move to really make sure that the United States guidelines have better diets for our people and particularly our children. We have been trying to deal with this subject matter for a number of years, and they have some good thoughts today and good words. So let me introduce you to the former president of the Navajo Nation, Jonathan Ness, who is a friend. And I will add this quickly because I think it's important. He is a current congressional candidate for the 1st Congressional District in Arizona. So welcome, President Ness.
Hey, good to see you, Levi and Dr. Herby. I appreciate the opportunity. And it's the 2nd district, Levi.
Oh, 2nd. I am so sorry.
No, it was the 1st, but after redistricting, it became the 2nd.
Okay.
You were right. So,
and I'll introduce Dr. Anna Herby, and I'll let her actually introduce herself, the organization she's with. Welcome, Dr. Herby.
Thanks, Levi. It's great to be here. So I am Anna Herby. I'm a registered dietitian with a doctorate in health sciences, and I'm the nutrition education specialist for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which is a nonprofit health organization based out of Washington, D.C. We work a lot on nutrition education programs, educating both healthcare professionals and the general public. And we've also been working closely on the dietary guidelines, trying to get better, more evidence-based recommendations and working to make recommendations to the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee.
And President Ness, you know, and I know, you've been working in Indian affairs for a long time, having served as vice president and then president of Navajo Nation. Our people have bad eating habits, and I don't think it's all our fault because we actually came up on USDA commodities delivered to either tribes or, if you were in an urban setting, a facility where you knew where to go and pick up that 5-pound block of cheese and the processed foods. And so, President Ness, speak to why this is such a high concern to you, ensuring that people have good nutrition habits and dietary habits.
Right. I think it's when we start talking about our own health and wellness, I know it's a private topic, and sometimes when we begin to discuss, our own health and well-being, it may become a little hot topic. But we see the statistics in Indian country, Levi, high rates of diabetes, high rates of cardiovascular diseases, as well as cancers. And where does it come from? Just as you were mentioning, our ancestors, there was no such things as those ailments. But nowadays we see that prevalent in our communities and in our young people, as you were mentioning. And so we need to have this discussion at the dinner table, if you want to say, with our families. And as an indigenous peoples, we are the first peoples of this continent, this country. And of course, if there were first people here, there were first foods. And the first foods of this country were the ones that we planted, corn, beans, and squash. Depending on what area you live in the country, there have been traditional foods that kept us healthy for a very long time. And of course, as you said too, once the federal government came in, took us off our land, they took us to a foreign land and they gave us food there. Commodity food program was introduced there, and it is not the most healthiest foods that were being provided. And to this day, that program is continuing, and you see some of those foods that are very unhealthy, and our project here is highlighting the need to bring in healthier foods if it's provided by the federal government into our communities.
And Dr. Herby, is this across the board for people of color? And what do you know specifically as it relates to Native Americans? Why it's so important to have this discussion?
Yeah, it is across the board for marginalized communities, and these rates of obesity and heart disease and diabetes, they're disproportionately high in the Native American population. And I think it's important to note that these are all diet related. And the good news there is that changing your diet can also change these health conditions. In some cases, they can be reversed. You can lower your needs for medications, but we need to change the foods that are most available. So switching from the blocks of cheese and the meat and the processed foods and doing more foods as grown, as President Nez had mentioned, the squash, the beans, the corn. These are all the foods that they're low in calories. They fill you up quite easily and you get plenty of nutrients, and they can really turn around these health conditions.
And it actually has to really become a way of life, right? It's not just a matter of, okay, I'm going to eat healthy because Christmas is coming or the holidays. So I'm going to eat healthy for a couple of weeks and then I can do whatever I want. You really need to alter your lifestyle or your eating habits?
Yeah, it's essentially a change in your habits and your cooking style. And for some people that can be hard, but the more available these foods are, the more our children are seeing them in schools and they're in grocery stores and they're affordable. Talking about like the beans, the vegetables, fruits, whole grains, the easier it will become. We want to make it the easy choice rather than the hard choice.
Mm-hmm. So does your organization work with the USDA? Tell us about the process that's underway right now in terms of developing the guidelines.
Yeah, so right now what's happening is the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee is meeting, and what this committee is, it's a group of nutrition experts basically, and they're reviewing all the science, all the nutrition research, and looking at it very carefully to come up with a recommendation, a report that they will then present to the USDA, which will be taken into account when the next round of dietary guidelines come out in 2025. But the important thing is that the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee is taking a lot of input from the public and taking everyone's arguments into account about what the healthiest foods are and what's appropriate for different cultures. And that's where I think the Native American voices really need to be heard and taken into account. And what we're doing at the Physicians Committee is listening to these meetings, getting public comment out there, and just making sure as many voices are heard as possible, specifically around the importance of plant-based foods, the beans, the whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. These are the simplest, healthiest foods that should be focused on a lot more than they currently are in the guidelines.
And President Ness, I think you and I have had the conversation prior about how you changed your diet, your eating habits. What's really the secret behind that? Is just actually finding something in the new food categories that you know is safe for you to eat, but something you can really embrace? Because some people think it's, I got to give up my donuts, and that's the end of fun or comfort foods for me. But how did you do that? Did you find something that, like, the favorite foods among the things that you know are healthy?
Oh gosh, I think we in our household we went back to what we used to eat when we were growing up, and how those were cooked. And I think more and more we've seen some of the Native American chefs preparing some very good food. I mean, some of these plant-based dishes are very delicious, and and those are things that we grew up with, and our ancestors or grandparents also grew up with. Look at what Chef Sherman is doing right now, utilizing our traditional foods and putting them into some recipes that are very delicious. I think, yes, it takes a little time to adjust from eating, I guess they call it the standard American diet, right? And plus, we're so busy these days, fast food restaurants are almost at every corner. But you can also prepare these foods at home and share it with others. And it's very good. For me, you know my story. I wasn't very healthy, especially as a tribal leader, telling children, young people, constituents, take care of yourself, eat right. And I was 300 pounds at the time. No one's going to believe me if I tell them to, eat right and exercise. But I finally needed to get control of my own health and well-being. I lost 100 pounds, started running, got rid of all the processed foods in the house. That was a little challenging with my family, but it took some time. It took time, and we started having fresh foods, vegetables. And I know people will say, well, vegetables are costly. But if you go plant-based, the cost of meats today is so high. If you eliminate the meat costs and go into veggies, you'll actually save money for your family in eating plant-based. But of course, that's a choice. That's what I was mentioning earlier. And sometimes it gets very controversial. People will look at you and say, you're not going to tell me what I'm going to eat or not to eat. But of course, at the end of the day, we just want our people to be healthy. And as you know, Levi, I got a little controversial during the time I was president when I took away candy to be handed out during the Navajo Nation fair parades. Man, I got so much pushback, but I did let them know that our own Navajo Nation government spends thousands of dollars to purchase candy to hand out at the fair parades. And here, on the other hand, we're over here in Washington, D.C., advocating for more money to the diabetes program. It doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And if you put it in that frame of thought, I think the people realize, hey, he is right. And what we did during the parade, rather than just take away everything like the candy, we went out to the farmers. We bought their produce. We used the same money that was supposed to be used for candy. We used it to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables from our local Navajo farmers, and we handed out fresh produce at the parades. And a lot of other tribes in the area began to follow suit. So, I think there's a shift, and you're right, a shift of thinking needs to happen in the communities, and it starts in the household at the dinner table.
It does. And Doctor, are you familiar with the term Indigenous food sovereignty? There's a big movement, and President Ness just mentioned Sean Sherman's book. He's a sous chef. He has a National Book Award for, I think it's called the Sioux Cookbook. And I have it on my shelf, and I have to tell you, it was very well done, very well researched. But are non-natives embracing our indigenous food sovereignty concept?
Yeah, I have heard that term, and I think it's a great concept. And I think what it goes back to, as President Nez had said, is the first foods, right? The foods that were grown, and also the beans, the squash, and you had mentioned berries earlier. Those are the majority of foods that Native Americans have evolved to be eating, as the rest of us have, really. But what happened is the government is subsidizing different foods. So we have a surplus of meat, we have dairy, we have sugar. All of these foods are being subsidized, and so we have lots of them, and they're cheap. And what that's kind of trickling into the Native American communities, because they're just so common in the U.S. culture. And that needs to change. We need to go back to those first foods and get those to be the most common foods that are taught, teaching children how to cook them and eat them and really enjoy them.
Yeah, and the USDA at the National Congress of American Indians that was held recently, USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack was there, and they announced that 8 schools districts will be given incorporating indigenous food into the lunch menu. And I actually had the opportunity to interview him, talk with him, and they were already talking about, and you mentioned, President Nez, the lack of consultation takes place often. I said, this is a good opportunity to have tribal consultations, because I know that indigenous food sovereignty, I'm in Michigan, what we of the people of the Three Fires up here in Michigan may see as our food, traditional foods, may not obviously be what you ate on Navajo Nation, President Ness. So comment on that.
Yeah, there are 500 plus indigenous tribes throughout the country. Of course, the East Coast and the middle part of the country and the West Coast, and even Alaska, right? Alaska and Hawaii all have different variety of foods. But at the end of the day, it's always being planted. And those are the foods that sustained life early on. So this project with the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine is highlighting the need for, as you mentioned, that consultation. We have tribal consultation for many things, many agencies, but not this process, not the dietary guideline process. And we are actually interjecting ourselves by putting comments before the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. And we do have a Native American, one of our own, on that advisory committee, Dr. Blue Bird Jernigan. And she has been, giving a different perspective to the committee. And we have done public comments. It's great to have a partnership with PCRM. And being now out of government, Levi, allows me to my wife and I, to do a little bit more in what we are passionate about, and that's health and wellness, not just for Navajo, but all of Indian country. And we have a consulting firm, Nez Consulting LLC, and we were brought together and going out into communities to do these types of presentation, as Dr. Herby is mentioning, together. And we have received resolutions and support to comment to the dietary guideline committees the need for tribal consultation and the need for better foods in our tribal communities. We have resolutions from NCAI, San Carlos Apache, the Karuk Nation in California, the Albuquerque Area Indian Health Board, all Pueblo Council of Governors, ITCA from Arizona to Tohono O'odham Nation. And we are being invited to come into a lot of tribal communities to do this type of presentation. And the need to re-educate, can I say that, or educate the USDA. We've been having great meetings with the Indian Health Service with Rosalind So about the project. Of course, this is not a project that we just started. It's been going, and now it's just a coordinated effort towards the U.S. U.S. Dietary Guidelines Committee, because the guidelines come out for every 5 years. So right now, the Dietary Guidelines is talking about the guidelines for 2025 to 2030. And 2030 and 2035 will be coming pretty soon. And that's where we're recommending that tribal consultation to happen. National Indian Health Board, the National Council of Urban Indian Health have received these types of presentations and are very supportive. And I think because of that, and other tribal communities, and of course NCAI raising the awareness, there's going to be a push for more research and data gathering in tribal communities on the impact of indigenous foods and how it relates to our health and in our communities.
And Doctor, what do you say to the argument that eating healthy is just way too expensive? You walk into a restaurant and you want a salad, and boy, it's $15, $16. And if you do want some meat, it's another $5 to $7. And you can be spending $15, $20, $22 on a salad, which is supposedly healthy, depending on how much salad dressing I think you put on it. But it's what do you say to the high cost of eating healthy, and how should consumers really make those decisions?
Yeah, it's a good question, because we hear this a lot, especially as a dietitian working with patients. People are telling me like they can't afford healthy food. Mm-hmm. But when you really break it down, sure, going out to a restaurant, that's definitely going to be expensive. That's just the world we're living in right now. But buying raw ingredients, especially plant-based ingredients from a grocery store, and being able to put them together in a delicious way, is actually not expensive at all. Our organization, PCRM, we have done research, and in our research studies, we put people on a plant-based diet for anywhere from 12 to 16 weeks to up to 2 years. And in one of our studies, we actually tracked the cost of like everyone's receipts, what they were spending on food. And we had a standard, like a control group, and we had a vegan group on a plant-based diet. And it turns out that the folks on the plant-based diet, they actually did spend a lot less on their groceries and their food throughout the study period than those who were on a standard diet. They spent a little bit more on fruits and vegetables, understandably, but the difference between like not purchasing meat and dairy products and those higher cost items brought the total bill down significantly.
So I'd like to see a copy of that report. That's interesting. I like to hear that. So I do know that when you walk into almost any grocery store in America, you get hit almost immediately with that fresh bakery products that are on sale with all the filled with sugar. You at the checkout lines, just rows and rows of candy and potato chips and all that comfort food. So I do think that there's needs to be a big shift. Hey, when will these recommendations from the committee be submitted? Because you're talking what, President Ness, 2025 to 2030. So is it coming up soon?
Right. Well, right now the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee are accepting comments. So if you look onto the web and Google it, you as a consumer, as an individual, can also put a comment on through the pipe to the advisory committee to demand better foods in this country. But yeah, the process is underway right now, and towards the end of the year and the early next year, they're packaging up the language for the guidelines. And so right now we're early on. That's why we're doing comments. But they're going to be wrapping that up, and all the experts are going to be putting the recommendations onto the draft guidelines, and then they're going to be discussing the draft guidelines. And Dr. Herby, do you have any updates on when the final guidelines will be issued out?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. They just had their 5th meeting last week of the Dietary Advisory Guidelines Committee, and meeting number 6 is in September. It's the final meeting, and so I think sometime after that, the report will be coming out, the advisory report, and that'll go then to the USDA in 2025, which will influence the final dietary guidelines.
That's great news. And then, in a real practical sense, for those who want to eat healthy, depending on where you live in the country, I don't think it's too late to actually still plant those green beans and some of those produce products, right, President Ness?
Right. I mean, I mean, it's that time of year to plant, and there's going to be a lot of farmers out there, and especially in tribal communities. Some of these farmers, are selling their produce on the side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
Stop buy some fresh produce. I guarantee it, if you buy from within the tribal community, I bet you it's the legacy seeds that were planted, those seeds that were handed down generation to generation. And those are, if I can say, pure indigenous foods without any genetically modification to those seeds. And those are what our ancestors lived off of, and I think it's probably the most healthiest foods that we can eat in this country.
Yeah, the Three Sisters garden, right? The beans, right, and squash, and what else?
Right,
corn.
Yeah.
But just one quick thing. Back in when I was the president, we had a partnership with the supermarkets on the Navajo Nation, Bashes. They have some of these big parking lots, and what we did was have farmers markets in the parking lots, and it not just helped the farmers, it also helped Bashes, because when people came in, they needed ingredients too, so they went inside and purchased other items. But back to your question about being expensive, I think we learned a little bit about the cost of food during the COVID-19 pandemic, because we were buying our food at the supermarket and taking it home and cooking foods, and we weren't going out. So we weren't spending so much funds on going out to eat, because we had to buy our groceries and cook it at home, which was great because it brought the families together. And one of the challenges that I did during the presidency is like, come back together at the dinner table, clean off your table. I know there's a lot of books and whatever on the table. We don't tend to come together as much as we used to back in the day, and have a food, because once you cook food, it's a lot healthier, I believe. And then when we eat, our families get together and we begin to communicate and talk, and it builds a family. And I saw that happen throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, we also challenged people to plant their food during that time, and rather than being scared and locked up in the house, go plant a garden, go plant your field. And I think a lot of our citizens did just that. So it was great to bring that culture and tradition back into the forefront.
Yeah, I just read an interesting article. I think it was in the Washington Post that those who garden have healthier lives. I mean, mentally, spiritually, and physically, emotionally. It's something about getting out in God's earth, right? Dealing with nature, and there's nothing like. I actually have 8 tomato plants in right now. Put them in maybe 3 weeks ago. And when you get that first tomato, it's like the best, right? It's like this is wonderful. It gives you a feeling of fulfillment, and really all I do is plant and water, right, and weed around it. But it's not hard. But I tell you, it's like you feel like you've really done something when you get that first tomato. And for many weeks, I have tomatoes. So, Dr. Herby, you have the last word on today's episode. Tell us some encouraging words about eating healthy.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight some changes to the guidelines that could really help to emphasize more traditional plant-based and Native American foods. And that's the language that they use when these recommendations are made. We're talking more about nutrients and less about foods. For example, if you think of the My Plate, we've got the 4 food groups. We've got whole grains, fruits, and vegetables, and then there's protein. So one of these things is not like the other. Protein is actually a nutrient versus a food group. So what we want to do is change that food group to legumes and highlight the beans that go along with the squash and the corn, the 3 sisters. And that makes it more digestible, more understandable to talk about actual food rather than nutrients. Another example is saturated fat, which is something we know we want to reduce in the diet. The guidelines do clearly state this, but they don't really mention where saturated fat comes from. So a lot of people might be a little bit confused what that means practically for their everyday lives. And what it actually means is reducing meat, cheese, and dairy and these animal products. That's where the saturated fat is. And focusing again more on the plant-based foods, the foods that are grown in your garden, like the tomatoes. So that's going to be a really important change. And I do think, I just want to emphasize that you can change your diet, you can change your health, and sometimes these improvements can happen really quickly if you do make those dietary changes to shift towards more of a high fiber or plant-based diet full of antioxidants. People are able to reduce their medications, reduce their healthcare costs, and just feel better overall. So I think that's a real message of hope and encouragement to anyone out there who's feeling like they need a change in their lives.
And Chimigwich to Dr. Herby and President Jonathan Ness, who is current candidate running for Congress in the 2nd District of Arizona. And to our viewers, Chimigwich for tuning in. Next week, we will have a guest talking about the Indian Citizenship Act. The actual signing took place. The anniversary was 100th anniversary was June 2nd, but Native News Online is devoting the entire month of June so that those who don't know much about it really get educated about the importance of Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. And so tune in next week. We'll be back to see you. In the meantime, be safe, plant some good foods. You still have time. So Chimigwich.
If you appreciate what we do here at Native News Online, we invite you to donate to support our continued work covering Indian country. You can scan this code with your smartphone or go to the link located below this video to donate today. We greatly appreciate your support. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And be sure to scan this code or go to the link below to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you for joining us today, and please be sure to join us again next week for another episode of Native Bidaské. Chimi Gwech.